Hi everyone, welcome back. Just a quick announcement, we'll be taking a group photo before lunch, so if you could not just run off right away after the talk, we'll just take a quick photo here and then we can all go to lunch. And I'll be introducing our next speaker, Parminder Singh. He's the Executive Director of IT for Change. He was recently appointed as a member of task force set up by the Indian government on implementation of proactive disclosures provisions of the Right to Information Act. He was also associated with the Department of IT's subgroup on e-governance for the 12th five-year plan. He recently authored a report on community knowledge centers for the Karnataka Knowledge Commission. So thank you very much, Parminder, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hello, everybody. First of all, I would like to develop a shared understanding of the subject on which we would have a discussion today. I myself am not very clear what does internet access activism mean. I have a notion, but I would ask one or two of you to just say what would, from the top of your head, think this is. What is internet access activism?
One would be using the internet for activism, which we were talking about.
Already heard, yeah.
The other thing would be talking about the different things that are on the internet, like privacy, like all of the security, like social networking, and discussing, and also the government's role in access of the internet, figuring out what is acceptable to us, what is not acceptable to us, and actually raising a voice against that.
The last part, what did you say about government's role regarding access?
Yeah, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, understanding that and raising a voice against those things.
Anybody else has a different, am I audible without this mic? Yeah, it's working, yeah. Anybody else? Because to be frank, I think the access word has been used for other things than the ones you have spoken, which are the main things which internet governance or internet related discussions are about. Internet access generally is, I want to hear somebody else say this because what do they think? I think a shared understanding of what we would talk today is useful. Internet access, what does internet access mean to you? And then we can add to it internet access activism. When I hear the word internet access, that's about those people. There is a world of internet changing us, changing everything around us, and then we have that pang of conscience, and we think of a certain big group, and that word access forms in our mind. And I have a feeling that that's what generally the word access gets associated with. And I would work on that presumption at present. I'll then go to the word activism. I understand you have had lectures on technical issues related to access, including market issues, which I consider technical issues, how the markets can be perfected, improved. I consider that itself a technical set. And that's around how access can be improved. And with activism, I would understand a political approach to internet access. And that's what I would take today. I would be trying to use this 1.5 hour to discuss very political approach, a very political stance on internet access. And the word internet itself, as we would look at it, is a little more than just a particular technical artifact, which many of you seem to be using right now. It's also a placeholder for a large set of social changes which are called information society. I wouldn't completely go over to social structural kind of things bigger than the internet, but not also consider internet just as when you are on the broadband line and you open your www web browser, and that's the internet. There's something more socio-technical phenomenon, and that's what internet is. And so we would like to talk today about a very, as I said, a political approach, a political understanding of what internet access is. And as I said, for me, the access term connotes the relationship of those people, those marginalized groups, poor, in poverty groups, to the phenomenon of internet-mediated society in the middle of which we all live today. And that's also the story of what has been called as ICTs for development. Somewhat unfortunately, the story started at G8. G8 is, the group of the 8 most powerful countries. And in their meeting, in the summit at Okinawa in Japan in 2000, they came out with a charter on information society, which first time espoused some principles for ICTs for development. And subsequent to that, there was a partnership between Markle Foundation, UNDP, and Accenture to come up with what has been called as the Digital Opportunity Initiative. And they came out with a report on development dynamic. It's a bigger, larger name to it, I forget, but that's where first time the relationship between ICTs and development, which again is a placeholder for those marginalized groups which tend to stay out of these kind of changes, at least early on. Now that's good, because somebody needed to take a lead, make the connection, and they made it. However, this was also a time of the ascendancy of the neoliberal ideology, and what better place than to be at a G8 summit and the initiatives which arise out of it. Among many good things which this report did, one thing was it said those development initiatives are expected to be successful which include a business model. They said business model is essential, not on any basis, but on pure ideology. They said business model is essential for success to development programs. And well, that started off, and that set an ideological stage for what followed. UNDP took it up as a thematic area of work. Many other donors took it up, and telecenters were set up in many places. As you know, India was one of those major test fields. I think this initial phase, and I'll talk a little more about it, did successfully do one thing. They placed a computer in a village. We will see it did nothing for many years, but it developed a certain kind of relationship of that artifact to social issues. I mean, otherwise, computer could just be an accounting machine, it could be a business machine, it could be something which travel agents use, etc., etc. Every artifact has a meaning around it. And those early experiments, most of them failures, did establish a connection between the internet or the computer and social issues. I mean, there were those kind of fantastic claims made that health will be within reach of everybody, governance would be within reach of everybody, markets, etc., etc. Nothing happened, but it was said so many times that this particular connection was formed forever. And that's the positive side. The negative side was the problem that it somehow claimed that internet or telecenter is a business model mediated space. The alternatives could have been that it could have been seen as a library, it could have been seen as a school, which are public good stuff. For me, that forking is very important. And that's a discussion I would like to get into with you today. What do you think? Basic access, basic use of the internet is a public good, or it is a competitive market good? And I think that is one of the biggest issues of what could be called internet access activism. Okay, let me involve you at this stage itself. Between the two, a competitive market good or a public good, what would you consider basic internet access to be?
I mean, it's not commercial for profit, but it should be able to generate sufficient resources to sustain itself.
Yes, anybody else before I engage with this comment? Okay, I think gray areas are useful, but there is an essential nature, like education. What would you want education to be? Or how do you see education? As a public good or as a commercial competitive good? Basic education. As I said, the basic access to internet. There's different from high levels of education and having the internet to play games all night. Basic access to the internet. In that sense, I would like to pick up from what do you think basic education should be? A public good or a private commercial good? Okay, so yeah, no, right now we are thinking what is our, see, there are norms, and on norms, we may think the world shapes us, but the world is actually shaped by our own norms. And we shouldn't be blind to that, and we shouldn't minimize the force of those norms. It is a mental assent we give to what is right and wrong in this world, which shapes the world. So right now I'm asking, what do you instinctively think it should be? And then we'll talk about how it is in the real world. Its nature is not public good?
I mean, to use the analogy used in case of education, it didn't come up as a public good. It came up as something that is to be controlled and to be circulated within certain classes of the society, and that is how education came up. Same goes for internet, but that does not mean that it should remain the same. It should remain a commercial good. It should be a public good, especially basic internet services.
So you're saying basic internet should be a public good?
Should be public good, yeah.
Yes. I think, again, let's be very clear. I think, I'm sorry, being blunt, we don't want to clothe our ideologies with what is happening, what could have been happened. Let's be what we think. I mean, I have a right to say this is my vision of the world. I mean, nobody can stop me from saying that. Let the world be whatever way it is. So let's not clothe our ideologies with how we see it. What we want is basic health, education, and internet. And if we think it's a public good, let me come in, and I was wondering whether you were going to make that point. There's an economic definition of public good, which people use to subvert the basic thing, and I don't really believe it says that public good is that which is non-excludable and non-movable risk. I mean, nothing more than security perhaps is really a public good then. It's very difficult to find a real public good. Education is excludable, is a double risk. You give education to one, it can take away resources from somebody else. You can send somebody out of the classroom. So I think, I'll define public good. Public good is that for which there is a compelling political justification to provide it by public funds. That's, for me, the definition, non-economic definition of public good. It's a compelling political justification for being provided through public funds. And that's the definition we are working on. And let's not confuse ourselves with an economic definition, which is again used in defense of certain ideology, which I think unfair. I mean, that is a technical term which may be applied partly to some things. I mean, internet access also have huge amount of externalities. Public education has huge amount of externalities, but there's nothing essential about public education to make it public good. I remember reading some Canadian, not Canadian, a British colonialist in Canada who said in 17th or 18th century about education that there's something which should definitely never be thought about these people because it would do these kind of things, and that was the dominant conception at that time, and there was nothing which therefore made education essentially as a public good. It's a normative thing. So, so what happened, however, was, and going back to the old story, is that it was decided that it's a commercial good. And somehow, and sorry, I didn't take you, I think to say it should be self-sustaining can be said about a school as well. It's a society's decision. We can say about a school, about a library. There's another example. Should library be a public good or a commercial good? And I mean, nobody can be stopped from saying that, well, it should be self-sustaining. But I don't think it should be self-sustaining because, and I think here I would differentiate between what is a playing field issue and what is a game issue. Playing field is the rules of the game issue. The rules of the game have to be equal for everybody. And I think education, internet access, basic internet access, libraries constitute playing field conditions. Playing field conditions should be equal. When the game starts, that's different. And commercial enterprises, the jobs we take, how much we earn, etc. is the game. But the playing field conditions should be the same. And for me, the basic internet access is a playing field condition like education and access to libraries, basic health, etc. However, again, going back to the story, that it was somehow decided that no, it is a commercial good. And telecenters were put in a village with a revenue model, with some kind of internet, and it didn't work because people did not know what to do with an internet. What would they do about an internet? I remember early, about 7-8 years back, when we were all using internet, some of my friends in the army who would get easy loans for buying a computer, did buy a computer because some of us who were in a different world were using it. And he after a few days said, I don't open the computer because when I open it, there's no mail to me. And then for many few days earlier, I used to open it, but then I don't open it anymore. And that's what would the computer or internet to be to a poor person, right? And then we say, no, I don't know why we're not using the internet. Such a world of opportunity awaits them, and then they don't use the internet. They are not ready to pay 10 rupees an hour. What's wrong with them? And there's nothing wrong with them. What is wrong with those people who conceptualize internet in a certain manner. And I think that was practically the main reason whereby we failed to take a public good approach to just putting that wire in the village telecenter and tell villagers, okay, people can sit it, but not more than half an hour, one at a time. We have got 4 computers. You can use it, but maybe pornography is not allowed because that's a nuisance in a public space. But yes, you can just use it. I think things would have been different. We refused to take it because it was an ideological decision in my view. And I'll come back to then what are the lessons which we should take from it. Somewhere along the line, UNDP and other donors thought that this is not working, and they stopped funding ICTD. And someone got that brilliant idea. Telecenters failed because mobiles are the thing. Well, telecenters failed because they were using a business model. And therefore, if you don't look at the reason of the failures, you can't have a replacement for them which is not addressing those reasons. And now, I could also partly tell the story of telecenters in India, which culminated into the common service scheme, which we have about 1 lakh of telecenters, which are about 100,000 telecenters. And why they are not successful, because they followed a certain model which was followed despite the fact that they have been failing. And there were other successful models which used another relatively public goods model, like in Akshaya in Kerala. But despite evidence, they kept on using that particular ideological stance and things didn't work. And now we have that mobile thing. Anything about telecenters, the basic models which we want to discuss, and then I would go to the mobile story and the rest of it to see how we are talking about access for the marginalized people. Any views about telecenters? Why they work, why didn't they work, what do they do? I would like people to come in because I'm not going to talk all the time. Any questions about this part of what I think was the access model being adopted? Okay, then the mobiles, which is the big success story. Of course, absolutely game-changing. Mobile connectivity, mobile voice telephony was a game changer. We know what all it has done. I'll cut that short because that's an area of agreement, what all it changed. However, I would like to see whether that model is transportable to internet access, and whether what succeeded in terms of voice telephony would also succeed in a similar manner, in a similar commercial telecos led manner for internet connectivity. That's what it's touted as. You see, mobiles did it. So what is your opinion? Does it then also translate into a similar success story for internet, mobile internet in the next, say, 5 years? Or there is some different trajectory here? You think that translates? Okay. Let's discuss that. I mean, I'm just opening up some views, and probably then you can tell this doesn't look like this, but that's what my view is about. See, voice telephony is not something you need to invest in developing a new social system about. We talk, everybody talks to other people, and you just talk over distance. You have to learn to do some numbers, which even an old woman can learn over a few days. And once you learn that, you are into talking with the other person. It's as simple as that. And that multiplier effect is caused because there's no investment into applications, social ecosystems, networks, nothing. You use your existing networks with whom you in any case would like to talk, and you can talk now over distance, and that itself changes a lot about your livelihoods, social capital, possibility of access to certain kind of services as well. However, internet is complex, and this is not what I'm just extrapolating. The experience shows that broadband has not taken that curve. And there's good reason to do that, because as you earlier noted, for internet you need something which you would want to do on it. Voice is something which is ready. I mean, you start talking to people. But on internet you need an ecosystem. And ecosystems for marginalized people are different from ecosystems from the paying customers. Unlike voice, because whatever technology you have in Bangalore, you use the same technology in villages of Mysore, and then you are up and connected. For internet, Facebooks, the movies you see, the social architectures you enter into in the digital space, they're very different for the paying customers than for those people who are not ready to pay. Now that's a problem, because they wouldn't relate to these unless you, of course, force cultural, social changes around them, which is also what companies do in a very devious manner, whereby you force them to get into these cultural, social constructs. However, the experience is that people don't take up, because, I mean, the placeholder is you don't have local language content. Local language is just a way of saying much bigger reality, local, social, cultural constructs. You don't have that, and internet is about that. Internet is about the kind of things you do to be amplified, enhanced, transformed, but starting from a certain base. You want to do those things. The market is doing it for all of you guys, all of us guys. They're noticing what we want and then providing that. That's not the same as what other people in different cultural milieus want, and the market does not have an incentive to invest into that. And therefore, the logic of mobile phone success being transposed to internet success for me is unlikely, and the facts are the ITUs, UNCTAD's reports all say that the broadband is not taking that curve. Actually, broadband is one of the cheapest infrastructures. If you look at roads, irrigation, etc., you have just to lay a fiber to the village, and the bandwidth consumption is really not high there. I read a figure, statistics about 7-8 years back, which said fiber runs within 15 kilometers of about 85% of the villages of India, and things would have only improved. So you have to just connect that last 15 miles. Digging the canals, not the digging canals, digging those, digging the soil to lay the wire is one of the biggest costs, which can be covered under NREGA. And then there's just cost of that fiber into 15 kilometers or so. The cost is not high. Actually, there were experiments, state of Andhra Pradesh, state of Rajasthan. Akash Fiber did it in Rajasthan, and somebody else did it in Hyderabad about 5-6 years, have attempted to provide a wire to the village. And then nothing happens. Neither there is a political incentive or a political motivation to provide that, because people are not eager for that thing. And then those things just died. Now I think you need to learn a lesson from that. It's very easy to provide a bandwidth to a village, provide a fiber to the village. Nothing happens. Therefore, it's not that particular wire reaching the village is a problem, not in India at least, most of India. And then what is the problem is something which is then to be addressed, because that's related to access. There's no access without answering that problem. And I think therefore we are reduced in our discussion today to that problem. Why don't they do something with the internet? And what is needed to be done to make them do those exciting things which you all do? And why do they not just get on with such excitement which the internet is supposed to give them? So what needs to be done? What do you think needs to be done? Because as I said, some states have tried to reach internet broadband to the villages. Nothing happened, and then therefore those initiatives stopped. I'm talking about 5 years back. Now again, Bharat broadband is laying a fiber to the villages. It claims it would lay in within a few years, but there's no haste because there's no political pull. I mean, nobody's really shouting at them to give it to my village, really. So probably the internet access question therefore is wrong, or access is something else. So what is it that we need to do to get those people onto that excitement, that transformative potential which we think internet holds for them, which internet has done to our lives? Yes?
Literate, and we speak of access. So that's the problem. And also it's like just laying cables doesn't really help, because unless you teach them how to do certain things on the net, and that support system is completely lacking.
What kind of things would they be? We can teach them.
Say for example, a community center, which where it's also can take some smart rural youth and put him there or her there and ask her to teach. I know one movement, FSMK, which has which installs these community centers nearby slums and get these kids to kind of use the system. And it doesn't take much cost, and they're running it just like using old computers. So, and connecting that, and they just pull in some money, and it's working fine, and many of them are taking jobs. And I know one girl who has taken that over. She goes to college in the morning, and evening she comes back and teaches people. So this is working, and they are, I don't know what use they'll put that technology to, but just to kind of allow them the access. This is what is needed, a community center which doesn't charge you, but is a what service.
Okay, so what one level we can cross, and that it is supposed to be provided as a public good, and if you start charging the first day that guy enters telecenter, it doesn't work. It should be on a library model, and people should be allowed to do things with it. That much I agree. But I have also studied telecenters a lot. We run telecenters in Mysore as well, which I come to. Yes, teaching kids computers, and then from them somebody becomes a teacher of computers, is a small loop which then closes and nothing else happens. Now this loop is very understandable. First, when you set up a telecenter and say, okay, all kids can learn computers, or even if you have 50 rupees, I'll teach, all people come. By 8th month, you have taught it to all the kids. You have taught Microsoft basically to all the kids. And then some of them would, because one of the telecenter operator would get married if she's a young girl and go away, and another one would become in her place. I'm not minimizing it, but I'm quarantining a particular case. That happens, but nothing more happens. And that's not transformative. That's not what the way our lives have changed by the internet, the kind of things we hear ICT brochures talk about. That's not what that is.
Then has it to do with the ambience that we live in? So the environment we are part of, which is completely different from, say, what it is in slums and what they need, basically.
Yeah, I think we forget that internet is absolutely social. Facebook is not something of a technical thing. How to like a friend, how to follow a friend, how kind of networks are made. They're social constructs. They're made somewhere in Harvard or wherever, and we kind of are culturally close to that mindset or whatever, but we could change a bit. But they're all social things, they're cultural things. It's not a technology to be used as a tool for everything. And those constructs are not what they get related to. And I'll give you an example of and that's what you are saying about the ambience, and that's what I'm talking about, a social ecosystem. We use these telecenters in Mysore villages, and how it worked. One example will tell you. Community radio. Now, why would, first of all, community radio is easy to relate to for women, but not very easy unless they understand why. But first, they're busy, they're going for daily wage labor, and they don't have time for these kind of things. However, once they heard a discussion by a village they could identify about domestic abuse, they called and said, no, we have also things to say. And the certain things were not said in the right manner, we have something to say. Because they were in a trusted group where they knew that these guys are working for us. It was a Mahila Samakhya, which is the government of India's women's empowerment program, and we were working with them, with their self-help groups. So these guys, it takes many years for them to hear a radio. For them, a radio film is, yes, you come and see it. We were trying to make films with them, but it takes very long for them to first time suggest this could be done, that we could make it. You understand, those transformations themselves take a long time. A small thing, even how many ever times we tell you, this film can be made by you, but they have only thought that films are consumed, they're not made. It takes many months for them to feel they can be made, same way the radio program. But when they crossed that, they called and said, yes, this discussion was wrong in this manner, we will speak about it. Why don't you record our discussion? So first relationship with the community radio got established with what was their real issues and real lives. Now then they started recording the program. Now the next relationship with the computer, which is more germane to what we are talking. Now this woman who is illiterate, first time related to a laptop, not through a browser, not through Word doc, through Audition, which is audio editing audio editor. And she was shown that this is a sound and how music is pulled in, and it was played back to her. And then she, after very quickly, she could start using mouse because she knew that this is how it is. You can have something and put in music and hear the music or pull out music. So she was actually using, and that is the first time she's using, and then immediately understand because we are assembling a radio program, a song, which she knows instinctively thinks about. But that's a very small peep into what would be the points of entry for people into this whole thing, what is called internet. And we kind of go and tell them at our terms, okay, guys, get up. I have a basic module on internet, basic module on computer, and why aren't you up to speed? So the second thing is development of an ecosystem, which again takes public funds. It takes money to give women voice recorders, film recorders, to produce audiovisual content, to start editing them, to do video conferencing, show their films across. And that has to be created. There's no escape from that. It's not that they will simply somehow start using things and then they will jump through YouTube to these lessons. And I think this whole model has to be inverted, and we are guilty of making a world for ourselves and then say, why don't you like it? I can't understand, you are so dumb that you can't just start using it. So that's the second thing. Not only a public goods model, but also expenditure of money to create an ecosystem. I'll come back to it because this looks like a huge amount of public investments, and how would that be made? And I would take a digression to, I think, re-invite the interest of the group back to this discussion. But I'll come back to it because internet is a very good tool for collaboration, for getting voluntary energies into producing resources like open source did. Same can be done with content and many other things. The development work can be networked by computers at a local system, and we should be using resources for networking and using voluntary labor as Facebook uses and Google uses for making its Google Maps and their own saleable artifacts. How that could be done, we are doing some experiments about it. But this kind of things, public investments and kind of getting a collaborative networks working, getting voluntary labor, voluntary contributions from groups, people, to create those public goods. So therefore, public is not really public as government, but public as public and community. And these models are important for internet access. I think I'd perhaps move on to an issue which would be more immediately interesting. And that's the issue of freedom of expression versus, and this versus is deliberate, issues of access for the marginalized groups. And this versus, this competition between two kinds of issues show in what I consider are the regulatory battles around the internet which are going on. So, well, should internet be regulated?
It needs certain kind of regulations, yes. It can't be completely unregulated, but at the same time, certain freedoms need to be kept in mind when those regulations are put in place, I would say.
What kind of regulations does it need?
See, the internet by its nature is quite open and quite public. There are some sensitive data available on the internet as well which needs to be protected. So there needs to be some regulations in place which can protect that sensitive data as well. I would say, even though open data is the culture and it's something that should be promoted, but not all data can be open.
I think we need, this much I agree, but you know that telecom is highly regulated. What is it regulated about? No, content is not the big regulation on telecom.
Resource allocation, spectrum.
Yes, it's on resource allocation, universal service funds, spectrum allocations, mandatory service obligations. It is these things, common carriage obligations. This is the great set of regulation on the telecom. And today you should recognize that telecom and internet are the same things. There's one thing, I mean, mentally you may want to divide it. Either all traffic already is carried on IP platforms, or they would be carried on IP platforms in a very near future. So we are talking about one communication infrastructure and the issue of regulating it or not. And the problem is that we have got too accustomed to looking at internet from a middle class point of view. All responses I am able to get has a narrow window of analysis of what are the issues about it. The moment the issue is about the rights of the marginalized groups, it is about universal access. It's about whether internet companies would pay universal service funds, whether they would observe common carriage rules. Are there mandatory coverage obligations on them? Now, there has been, and groups, I mean, there's always a trade-off. Moment you bring in regulation, the guys would try to do something with your content. So you say absolutely no regulation. Doesn't matter if universal obligation things go bad with that. Now, this is a political trade-off, and whoever is in a position to drive political opinion, political decision making is able to get away with that decision. And that brings to me the ITU and Wicket. At Wicket, what was the big battle, according to you? You of course would have had some kind of discussion on the World Conference on International Telecommunication, which happened in Dubai last year. I'm just trying to make these things a little more provocative. And it was about the world, UN wants to control the internet or not. Now I think that's one thing. There was another battle happening there. Should there be any national level or international level regulatory structures around communication infrastructure or not? That was the hidden battle behind the freedom of expression battle. The battle that internet companies say that market has been perfected, we don't need regulation, and all the things which regulation used to do, which was to get poor people in, the markets are able to do it now, so just be done with the markets, be done with the regulation. That was a big fight taking place there. Should communication infrastructure be regulated at all or not? Now, the proof of that is what's happening in the US. US, spearheaded by AT&T, but also other companies, have been attempting to say that since regulation was about the old style telephony, and now telephony itself is internet protocol, and internet is not regulated, therefore there's no regulation, And therefore, unlike earlier times, when if you get a license for a certain area, you have to serve everyone, even if somebody's house is very far off, close to a hill, you have to get a wire to that place. That's a part of the license. But now, since internet is the carrier of all traffic, and internet is not supposed to be regulated, because if you regulate internet, the world would come to an end. Therefore, we don't have those obligations. And in any case, wireless is a boundless space. It reaches everywhere. So we don't have those obligations. They have been scaling back those obligations. They're asking for complete scrapping of universal service funds, universal service obligations, common carriage obligations, and all those things. These are the issues which directly relates to the interests of the poor people, and you need to see the political trade-off between the freedom of expression talk and the talk about people's right to be on that communication infrastructure. We need to be able to see that when we talk about privacy and freedom of expression, in those discussions, are we trading off the rights of so many people? That's very important. Yes.
Okay, how is that going to help? Because you never will be able to bifurcate the interests of the government from all these, the market interests. For example, if free market is something that is needed in terms of providing the infrastructure, and you say it's like government or any other regulatory agency is in a better position to do that, how are we going to differentiate between these two? It's like market and, any national or international body, and how are their interests different? Can we trust one better than the other, or choose the lesser of the evils, or whatever?
You know, this is a fundamental question. This is a fundamental question facing our political thinking. And I think I was at ThoughtWorks, which is a software company in Bangalore, and discussing same questions yesterday. And I think all those discussions are actually should come after that discussion. That what we decide, we can decide. There is a market principle which says that just leave it. If everybody is allowed to pursue their self-interest, there are so many people pursuing different kinds of self-interest that the outcome would be best for all. There's a market principle, and there's a democratic principle which says no, certain things have to be equal. And institutions have to ensure that certain things are equal. There are two principles. First of all, the principles. These principles are translated into institutions. Market principle gets translated into corporates, smaller manufacturers, all those things. And the democratic principle gets translated into politicians, governments, and all those bad things. The translation is always imperfect, right? But we have to, at a fundamental point, decide that have we given up one principle because we have thought that this translation is absolutely impossible to arrive into any kind of a workable institution, or not? In that respect, what is your response?
I would, it's like side with the government, say it's like government should intervene. But then when it's a democratic setup and you see interest playing, it's like that is practice says something else.
Yes, but practice of the market is also very something else, right?
Yeah, it's never a level playing field.
No, but then that's the point. If both the practices are something else, then still why are we very keen to abandon one side of the institutional ecology more than abandoning the other side of the institutional ecology? That's my question. Both translations, as I said, are imperfect, and it's up to us consumers on one side.
My point is exactly that there are no different things. These two are same thing. These are not like two camps.
No, there are two camps. See, I think we can take, in politics, not taking a position is a very strong politics. Not doing anything is an absolutely strong political stance. So, deciding, being located at one point in the social structure and taking an anarchist view, because you are served very well from the systems, is a political stance. We can't afford to take it if we have decided, and I think this group has a certain a political stance about it. It's about taking certain political responsibility. So I don't think we can, is somebody? So the issue is, yes, so if you are faced with this question that, no, these are political questions, we can't escape by saying both are bad. We can, depending on what kind of work you do. As an NGO, a political NGO who does advocacy, I can't. And if you can't, then you have to take a position whether regulation on internet is required, what institutional balances are required for that purpose. Because there is a move right now, starting from the US, including at the ITU, and I am no defender of ITU. ITU is one of the worst organizations, also because it's highly telecom dominated, for definitely all social, cultural, economic issues around the internet. Maybe some technical issues, but that also the present organizations are doing pretty well. However, to decide whether regulatory systems have to be dismantled or not, you are a part of the decision being made. Not taking a position is helping make a particular decision. And therefore, we need to think about it. And I'm not going to solve this problem apart from posing this problem, which I think is important. So what AT&T has done successfully is to be able to, in some states at least, roll back its responsibilities. And that's something only in the US it can happen. In 19 states of the US, there's a law which says that municipalities cannot build their own Wi-Fi infrastructure. They cannot. It's not that they don't. There's a law which prohibits municipalities from building their Wi-Fi infrastructures. Do you realize this? What would be the basis of such a law? Why? But still you have to have some good justification then market interest to bring out a law, right? There's a law which says government cannot have a Wi-Fi network. Municipalities cannot have a Wi-Fi network. And there goes the interest of those marginalized people. And the justification for the law is it distorts the market. It distorts the business models of the telecom players. Of course, of the government's passed it.
So?
Yes.
So how can we say it's like markets different from the government then?
Yes, markets are different from the governments, even if governments pass this law. See, arguments, there's a story which I read in childhood about, there was this tiger who was drinking water at a stream, and then there was a small lamb which was drinking water. And the tiger says to the lamb that, I don't know what's the English word for jhootha karna, I mean, what's it for, you're spoiling the water because you are drinking from the same place I am drinking. So I'm going to eat you up. And that guy said, no, you are drinking upstreams and I'm drinking downstream, so I couldn't be doing it. Then he says, but you used foul language with me last year. That's why I'm going to eat you. And he said, last year I'm 8 months old. I wasn't born last year. And then he says, your mother must have done it. So arguments can go any length. If I started talking about corporates, I can keep on talking what Microsoft did, but then don't you remember what Google did? It's not issues about, I would have to prove that government cannot make a mistake to say that there should be institutional balance between the public sector and the market. That's not the right argument to pursue, right? That is a government. Those people should throw out the government. The activists should work against those governments which are working. In those 19 states, there's a lot of activism which is working to get that bill brought back. But think of these kind of bills being passed, and what is your view vis-a-vis regulation of the internet in that background?
So, also, as you just said, it's a matter of balance as well. It's a matter of regulatory balance in the sense that we do not expect one law or one regulatory mandate to solve all the problems. Clearly, even if there is nothing like the UNCIRP ever created, that never stops Government of India to call up Government of US and ask for them to provide details, information kept by Google or Facebook. So the point is clearly not about, it's not about against regulation. The point is about, say if Government of India has some say regarding what kind of monitoring it can do, say in the BBM service, what other regulations?
What service?
the BlackBerry messaging service. The point is about, I mean, in my mind is about what other laws in India protect users of such services from being abused by the government under different laws. It's a matter of balancing out the regulatory measures, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about balance, and the balance
Right.
is swung too much to one side, especially in the civil society advocacy. That's my proposition, not necessarily what you have to address. The balance has, and that's also a sense of political responsibility. What you say should come from where we stand. There's no perfect truth. Truth is only dependent on where we stand, and where I stand today and I see civil society advocacy happening, I see absolute incapacity to discuss issues related to internet and marginalized people for half an hour without talking about other things, as is happening here. And I'm deliberately provocative. It has become incapable of saying, no, can we just go and stand in the middle of them and see where they are, how economic distribution is affected, how their access is affected, what kind of cultural domination is taking place, and therefore what we need to do the internet. Can we just over an hour discuss that? That's becoming difficult. Because unlike in other areas where, like in health, education, etc., the mainstream has already been built, and then we talk development. And therefore, yes, we are only talking about that. Here we are in such a flux where everything is changing around us, we are incapable of disassociating with what's changing about us to discuss about them, and there is real us and them. And in that case, IT for Change takes a clear stance. Really, I am very well served by the world right now. I'm happy about my life. And if it was about me, I wouldn't be in advocacy. Really, it's not saying it for the purpose of it. I'm very happy, and so are all the people who are working there. So we're really not looking at problems with our Samsungs or even our Facebooks. There are problems, and I would appreciate people fighting about them, but I wouldn't do it, a personal choice. However, I know there are people who cannot be in these rooms, in these places, and they have a lot of differential interest, and their interests have somehow been amalgamated into something is a common interest, which is not a common interest right now, and being proposed. Many of those proposals are actually hurting their interest, as I said about no regulation about the internet, and therefore taking away with it all kind of regulations which protect their interest. Now that's the point of balance we are talking about here. So yes, could somebody give me a break from talking for about 2 or 3 minutes? Anything, I mean, it's not necessary to come in relation to what I'm saying, anything, and yes, doesn't matter if it's about freedom of expression. I mean, we can talk about mobiles, you can talk about new kind of applications which improves people's access, because you can co-construct the subject. I mean, I have taken a certain viewpoint stance, which I thought was important to balance, but what kind of applications are improving people's access, lives? And as a political advocacy group, we are also interested always to attach with it what should therefore we do is an issue. But yes, anything.
And say it's like from tomorrow there won't be marginalization. Okay, it's like, I don't know, this is not just about internet, this is about a lot more, it's also in other aspects of life which we don't recognize.
But does that absolve us from doing what we need to do in our spaces?
No, but the problem is, how do you do?
Yes, that's what we're talking. You tell us.
Right now I don't know.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's fine. As long as we see the problem, first of all. And the problem is real. And so many people who are very active in certain civil society spaces say we don't know, and that's not okay. If they have taken a decision that they are into internet civil society, and there is a 60% of people who have differential interests, and I'm ready to argue, and I'm ready to even listen to arguments that the differential interests are not that important as the common interest. That's fine. That's a good argument, though I don't believe it. I would pose arguments against it. The huge amount of differential interest, there's no organized civil society in the internet space, not no, but very little compared to, so that class distinction is very, very blunt in this space. And this has happened, I said, because we are trying to make decisions from a moving stage. It's very difficult to disengage from what's, in health you can do it, in education do it, there are mature systems. You can talk about education only about the poor. You can talk about right to education and stuff and what happens with poor students in classrooms. Because other things are stable. In this, so much is changing around us, it's become difficult to disengage from those things and important issues around it to do that. And we try to get that also built in balance to other things.
Exactly in response to what it's not in response to what you just said. It's rather a question. You mentioned how this debate regarding in Wicked and in ITU earlier, this debate about regulation gets posed in a certain way, gets framed in a certain way. What is in a way, in the last, say, 3-4 years, the status of this question of internet access for poor people? What's the status of the international debate on that?
The status of the international debate is that mobile telephony is held up an example that every issue of information society would be solved by the market exactly in the manner that mobile telephony has been solved. This is the status of the debate, period. And that's the problem. Because we both theoretically understand why would it happen, and practically there's enough evidence on the ground. Even USA has put in public money to extend broadband. USA, which would come to India and tell that keep regulation, internet out of any kind of, USA, the federal government has a huge publicly funded internet infrastructure plan. Australia has a big plan. Brazil has it. South Africa has it. Now India has it, the Bharat broadband. Still, it is almost as an apology. You don't talk about it in policy spaces because the ideology is so strong that it says no. Markets would do it. But it's been proven that broadband, the fixed line broadband, has a certain element of natural monopoly up to it. You can't lay 2 wires to the same village. I mean, you can't even provide for 1 wire. And when there's a natural monopoly, certain kind of public good characteristics come in because of that. But those kind of discussions just get kind of blindsided because certain big things happen, which is the freedom of expression. And I think what happened last week in the US, for me, I'm not taking a provocation on the UN SIRP thing, because I have a lot to discuss on that if I start talking about it. This is about a UN committee on internet-related policies, so I wouldn't take that right now. I will talk about it later. But for me, the big thing what happened in the last week, I know all governments would try to do what US was doing, given the technical capacities, and I think they simply went berserk on the technical capacities they suddenly found at their hands. The law was the same, but suddenly they found technically they could do everything, and they did everything, which is a problem. And that's, I think, the nature and description of the problem. And therefore, Edward Snowden's effort is very good even for the Americans, because there was nobody telling you that you can't do everything, because just there is an enabling law, which was made at a time when you couldn't do everything. And that really kind of amplified what they did. Other governments would like to do the same kind of things. They have to be stopped by advocacy groups, fighting through elections, or, I mean, influencing elections, or through other kinds of advocacy. But what has happened to me is good is that this has taken off the sheen from the US of that moral high ground which a freedom of expression defender that it used to be the de facto global leader of an information society in so many ways. And unfortunately, there is a global middle class which is so much disenchanted with their respective political systems that they look forward to a global leadership, and some of them, more than some of them, kind of accept that, though they can't really argue so much in favor. Have a new kind of amorphous political configuration on the top of which the US sat. And for me, the fact that that has taken a hit is a good thing. Yeah, so and again, all these questions for me are linked to internet access. And unless somebody is coming in now, I would go to the last part of what I'm trying to say. Okay. what is internet? We happily say access to internet. What would we call internet? Have you ever had a dilemma about that? Or you kind of find what you think, you know what is internet? Okay, that's complex. You know that Facebook, Google, and from today Twitter is free on certain mobiles in India. Free in the sense that you don't subscribe to data services, but you can still access them. You know that? Okay, it is. It is free in many African countries. It is free in Indonesia, but it's not free in EU and US because they're afraid. Because if they make it free, there will be regulatory action on them because it's a violation of net neutrality. So it's free in those countries where regulators are either sleeping or poorly informed or in the pocket of those guys. They're testing out that model. Now, if you get access to Facebook plus Google plus Twitter, is it access to internet? It's not. We're very strongly of this view. But that's what is the internet for poor people. And who can stop that? Market? No. The three telecom companies all know that the best bet is to have content providers pay them rather than the consumers because those guys haven't much money to pay. Get the content providers to pay them. Let those content providers suck out money in various ways which they are good at doing, but let the internet be a few commercial services. Now this is access to internet which the poor are already getting, and that's the model of the future. And to have that model work, they need to get all developing country guys, bureaucrats and judges who in any case are from middle classes and their sons and daughters study in the US, into this thing, internet should not be touched. It's too good a thing to be touched. Get that ideology into their minds. And then they would say, don't touch it. Oh, that's a problem, but that's a small problem in relation to freedom of expression, so let's go about it. I think activists, even fairly informed citizens, need to start thinking about it. This is happening. Very soon, there would be an internet which would be these 5-6 companies which would be completely free. And then there would be a public internet which would be of a very low quality and of a very high price, where those people who have a burning heart of activism would, just for the sake of ideology, subscribe to say, no, I would be on the public internet. Not most of the poor people. This is the model of internet you are talking about, which is unregulated. Again, not ideology, is happening. Proof is on the ground, happening in all developing countries, most of them. Even in Brazil, which has a very strong movement about internet net neutrality, even in Brazil, Facebook is free on many telecos. So yes, access to internet is not just access to internet as a given thing. Access to public internet. Access to internet, I would go to beyond that. Even if, let's say, this doesn't happen by some complete magical coincidence, even if we stay at the internet we have, 70 to 80% of the internet today that you use is about 7 to 8 websites. In any case, even if you preserve net neutrality. So, first of all, it's not going to be preserved, not going to be preserved for the marginalized people who need it most. Therefore, their dependencies on the rest of the world will greatly increase. Their cultural suppression, domination, etc. will greatly increase with the kind of internet we are getting. Even if we have net neutral internet, as you guys may have for some time, it is still dominated by few companies. And your internet experience is mediated through these companies completely. So it's really not public internet even for you most of the time. For it to be a public internet, again, you have to enforce standards. Those standards could have broken up the monopolies of Facebook and Google. They are not monopolies because they have brains as nobody else in the world has brains, and therefore they are innovative as nobody else can be innovative. There was early innovation, but they have, I thought, got the compensations for that. And I'm trying to connect the access issue to governance issue. Normally they are kept in two different rooms. Governance is about privacy, freedom of expression, and the rich people. Access is about providing internet connection, whichever kind, at whatever terms, to the poor people. Therefore, Microsoft's, Google's, etc., can be in that room as well. They are not. I don't know, some people from a technical background would be better informed. But there's no reason that Facebook or social networking sites do not use, cannot use open standards as email services use. Why is the difference? You know, emails, you may use any email service that interacts with my email service. If I send a reply, it goes to reply. If I do attachment, whatever I do in my email server, a different service, it corresponds to the kind of email you get. All email services interact with each other. Why do they do that? But Facebook doesn't interact with, say, any Facebook, I wouldn't say Facebook clone, a new social networking site. Because open standards were set up, which determined how email services will work. And that is the reason I use IT4Change.net. And if I send emails to you guys, you don't really feel the difference. Where does it come from, right? That's the reason so many email services survive, which are also being reduced by those blacklisting spam companies. But I'll leave that out. It's possible for there to be standards which determine that Facebook characteristics have to correspond to and interoperate with any new social networking which is set up, which you could set up at your college, locally, etc., and people can be talking to each other and you don't have those monopolies. Same is true, possibly true of search engines, etc. This doesn't happen because we have lost sight of governance of the internet completely, and we again think that the markets will take care of the governance. And the markets have decided that 10 companies are enough to give you 80% of the experience of the internet, and soon it would be closer to 100%. So I think all these issues are related to access. Access to what kind of internet is as important as access to internet, because I don't want access to opportunities for exploiting me, nor do the villagers want it, and that happens when access is mediated at commercial terms, which in mid to long term would definitely not be to the greatest advantage of the people who are accessing, who may be getting that internet free. So access issue itself is therefore linked to the governance issue. So well, that's the kind of coverage I wanted to make in my talk with you. If you have some time, and if you want to talk further, then you would have to do it. And I'm done.
How can we as civil society participate
In?
in influencing these policies?
Indian public grabs Right to Information Act out of most unwilling government 10 years back, right? Nothing is as bad for government as the right to information. And bureaucrat is ready to take a salary cut if he can get rid of this disease. But the public got it out of the government. The most unwilling government, because it directly goes to the power of the government. People do get things out of government, right? Right now, there is a very, very well-organized civil society advocacy on freedom of expression, which I am a part of as well. It has been effective. It has been able to pull government down on many things. It has been able to influence media and get the right things and been written the right times. And things have changed because of that. Who is going to represent those people who don't have the resources to do those kind of things? Of course, the organized civil society and the right-thinking people in general, in media, in bureaucracy, then start supporting. It's about first building the categories of debate, then raising from that some possibilities of action. both are important, and this attempt which I'm making is to create those categories of debate, of starting to recognizing that there are differential interests, there are political trade-offs between two kinds of advocacies which need to be seen. So I think influencing is about, first of all, being conscious of it and talk about it, and then among the more organized civil society who have professionally time for doing it, to take it further, make representations with governments, with people, talk to media, place stories in media, that kind of stuff. As I said, I was with some techies yesterday, and they had that same kind of question in the end. And we thought, okay, we can probably have some weekly or bi-weekly talk on politics of technology and just talk about what's happening to those people when the technostructures change, and have the discussions and then see what can be done. So yeah, I mean, there are difficult things to change things in this society, but I think starting facing the right direction is first important to reach the right point. I'm forced to stand here for the next 10 minutes, so you can make my life easier if you embarrass me less. No, okay. You're tired. I know it's the last day for you and you've been here for 5 days.
What's happening now? What's happening in what are the agendas in Baku? What is the next steps at the international level?
Okay, I mean, then I can talk about what we have been doing. I'm just back from Geneva last week. There is a UN working group which is trying to decide what should the global architecture of internet governance should be. Is about 40 members. There are 5 civil society members. I was one, and 22 governments, and then 5 from civil society, 5 from private sector, etc. Yeah, so I mean, I think you need to have a global space where normative talks take place. Unless there's a space, like this is a space has to be created. If there's no space, normative talk doesn't take place. That's the first thing you have to do. Normative talk before action starts. Right now, globally, there's no space where normative talks about internet takes place. Now, OECD talks about personal data. They're talking about the economies of personal data, and personal data is everything on the internet. It's everything about personal data. That's the currency of the internet. Now, OECD is forming views on what would be our conceptions of the economies of personal data, and it hurts my Indian sensibilities that India is not there. I don't know, it doesn't hurt many other people's sensibilities. It's simple as that. That discussion should include India. A lot of people pulled back India's stance when they said we should be there at the UN, completely refusing to answer the question that the same discussions actually are not only taking place at the OECD, they're coming up with principles. OECD came up with a set of principles on internet-related public policy making last year. They have made those principles, and I'll discuss what kind of principles they are, and now they're saying they'll go to different countries and get their signatures on it. Now, whether this is better or if all countries were together discussing them and then we did it. My view simply is that yes, it should have been the UN and not OECD doing the same thing. Now, the nature of those principles, which is obvious, if the rich countries decide something, it will be different from what the poor countries decide. That's fact, and we have seen this here as well. They are very intellectual property heavy. They favor private policing of intellectual property. Because the US knows that it can only police up to its own borders as per the normal policing methods, but the veins of internet runs across the world from the US, and therefore they think that intermediaries are right vehicles of policing for intellectual property, and that's a part of the internet principles for making internet public policies. Now, if Brazil and India were there, they would not have allowed intellectual property heavy principles to be made. That's how trade-offs take place. They may have wanted freedom of expression, the US and EU wouldn't have wanted it. EU and US wanted intellectual property heavy policing of the internet, India and Brazil wouldn't agree. And therefore, when all people sit together, better norms come up. This is what we have been trying. And the kind of resistance that has been faced from within the country to this proposal is unbelievable. And all in the name, are you going to give up the internet to the UN? Well, that's very funny because right now all those things which we are asking UN to take are being done by the US. But when the US is doing it, it's not control, and when the UN talk about it, it's control. This is part of the ideological battle, and that's the answer to that question. That yes, our work is to try to get people to agree to set up, if not regulatory spaces, which is not the idea, normative spaces, start discussion about principles, and those discussions should take place where all countries are present, and principles for internet public policy, which is being made, and that's the question to your answer. If you don't decide who will do it, somebody is doing it. As I said, OECD, and I can forward those to you. OECD has made principles for international public policy making and is going to different countries in bilaterals. They get their signatures on it because a poor country, when they're talking to the US in a bilateral trade agreement, you don't have much power. You want the US trade relations to survive and endure. So you sign on the principles which they made for you. The only other option is you sit there and make them. There's no third option because no politics is what is another form of politics. So that's what is happening. So there is an attempt that there should be a common place for normative talks.
Would this be taken up in private?
Yeah, I mean, we ourselves are hosting a workshop on this particular working group's work, and there would be other workshops on that. But again, I mean, when I'm talking about it, the level of the success which the dominant interest on the internet till today have had to obfuscate the issues and, let me use the word, co-opt civil society as well to a certain way of looking, and therefore keeping away the democratizations which we have been talking about has been momentous. And partly the IGF has turned into a vehicle of the same thing, which we do closely associate with it. We have been part of their management bodies as well, try to move it, but this has been happening very successfully. The domination of, now the multi-stakeholder advisory group to the IGF has Disney in it, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and those are the guys which have full free time to keep on talking, and the government guys or even a civil society guys, like half the time doesn't get money to go to Geneva, hasn't enough time to contribute emails. They are full-time guys who are just doing that and end up doing most of the management of that IGF, which things are a problem.
Can take this up and I don't know how this can be answered. Say if it goes to UN and the question was simple, why is not Europe not saying anything about this, or its stance is not clear? It seemed to be saying whatever US is saying, and if it goes to UN, what if the demon is China? So it's like, I shouldn't be saying it because it's politically incorrect in a platform like this, but still I want to know about this question. So this question of like why are not other players kind of fighting this US corporate, it's like complete control over the internet. Maybe they don't want to be some important thing on internet.
Why the EU guys, you are saying? Why the EU guys are not the European guys?
Many other, it's not very clear what, it seems to be in agreement in tandem with whatever US is saying. So
most is who? Most, did you say most are saying? No.
No, EU, Europe.
EU, yeah. Okay, see, we are an advocacy group, we should talk freely, it's good to say whatever we want to. China is a demon for freedom of expression, as US is for intellectual property. Yeah, I'm coming to the question.
UN is not an egalitarian body by any way, because it has its own structures. We have to keep also that.
What is not egalitarian about the UN?
In terms of, it's like what decides, and even if you say it's like those permanent members of the Security Council and all these things, if these bodies come to decide what happens in other platforms, then it will be, we are I don't know, it's like, it's a tricky situation.
Okay. One is that China is a demon and US is a demon. And we know that, right? Different areas sometimes, but they are. Intellectual property is huge. It's not a small thing. Freedom of expression is huge. It's basic. People are dying because of that. But do you know that the rest of the 100 years are going to be determined by the intellectual property frameworks which are being made today? What book you can read, which chapter you can read, which chapter while you are reading can be taken back by Amazon, is absolutely setting the standards of economic distribution in this world. We may be very well placed, but others who are not well placed are very, very afraid where would it leave them in the economic distribution chains. And that demonhood comes from the US, who right now controls the internet, as I just told you, is writing the documents. Second, about demons. How many guys in Indian parliament do you think have criminal histories? Huge numbers. Criminal histories. They are criminal histories. They are criminals, I mean, they are police histories. Huge numbers, right? Do you give up the parliament because of that? Or do you want to just change those people? Get the right people in. You don't give up the parliamentary system because, and people would easily as well argue. What is it? Our MPs, so many of them are rapists, would have had murder charges on them. That simply means work on that part. Don't work on displacing the parliamentary and the democratic system, which other people would say, therefore, it doesn't work. Exactly in the UN, and there are many less number of Chinas in the UN than the example which I quoted just now. Yes. Second, nothing happens in the, I'll give you all examples. Nothing happens in the UN unless everybody agrees. Right? Consensus. This non-egalitarian thing is again one of those examples. They can only deal with security issues. That the Security Council have a very limited thing. They can't come into every room and say we will decide. 90% of UN job takes place in General Assembly of the UN, which works with consensus. Security Council has a very small role, which is about what the US finally gets to do from the Security Council. And that also we should know then, again from your own example, who controls it is the one who is already having the power. So is your argument siding with that person or going against it? Finally, every argument is only partially making that thing. Why EU is not saying it? I was discussing with developing countries, actually proposed to them, see, it's very clear. Economics is most important, right? EU knows that the geo-economic model of the future is that in which it is with the US. It would not openly say something against them. They are very pissed off on what is happening on the internet. They really want change on the internet. But their friends, they won't say it, but if developing countries come up with the model, they are going to be the intermediaries and say, okay, let's come in between and push their interest from that side. Though in the closing days of the World Summit on Information Society, they were the ones which were most vocal that you can't close this summit without deciding to shift the control of the route to something international. That discussion has to be done. But right now is a hugely formative time. The world structures are changing. We may not understand, but EU understands. Powers are shifting partly to upper classes of China and India, and things are happening. And in that, the economic model is most important. And they're afraid that on that, they should stand firm with your friend, and that's the US. Internally, they don't want the root zone control to be done by US, but yes, on intellectual property, that's different. Because they're also rich countries, and they have a plan to live off the rents of intellectual property rather than by hard work. So they side with the US on those issues. So those are the reasons why they are silent. Otherwise, I mean, leave other examples out. You just answer my simple question. OECD is doing all those things, and I give an undertaking here. Nothing the UN would do what the OECD committee is not doing. We can sign it off on that. What is the justification of saying that the UN shouldn't do it? I mean, it's not democratic. You cannot use any example of China or Saudi Arabia with that, because first of all, it doesn't work because things work with the consensus in the UN.
Not UN take this up. It's like, how different will it be if UN takes it up with still strong players sitting at the helm?
No, I said, a lot of work. We have decided a bit to demonize governments, and then there is a limit to what we can think about it. I was in the UN last year on the invitation of a special rapporteur on cultural rights, who's writing a report on the right to access scientific progress. you don't know the kind of normative work which happens. All those things which we take for granted around us, what are the norms with which universities work, what is a college, what is a lecture, these were developed at some time. And this kind of, I should show you the document, you're simply inspired even with my experience, a bit of you, and you're inspired about the way work gets done, that scientific progress. Has everybody got a right? What rights can be made into properties? Those discussions take place and the documents get done on these. That kind of work is going on, even with all these people present there. And no system, as we said, principle of market, not the principle of democracy, will ever be converted into, fully into the perfect institutions. On the side of democracy, at least we have a right to keep on fighting and change it, improve it, go down the path of Scandinavian countries who are really good in many ways. But on the side of the markets, domination produces domination. And then you keep on pushing certain groups out. So that's the trade-off. I mean, again, once you agree to a balance, then that work on improving governments or the UN doesn't stop at all. I mean, that's only the start to that. Yep, I'm done. Thanks. No, I'm perfectly fine, yeah.
But I hope you're staying for lunch and
Yeah, I can take some lunch, so I have to rush, but you're going to lunch right now, no?
yeah,
Yeah, sure. Oh, sure, yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, yes. Thank you, dear. Beautiful color.